Hello and welcome to The Nexus. Today we're looking at Bill and Melinda Gates, or more to the point, their divorce. After 27 years of marriage, they're going their separate ways, with combined assets estimated to be as much as $145 billion. We know they weren't having money problems, so why are they splitting up? Now, the Wall Street Journal is reporting that Melinda's decision to file for divorce has something to do with Bill's relationship with the convicted sex offender, Jeffrey Epstein. Now, that's not confirmed, but it is an intriguing connection, which we'll explore later in the program. But also look at why Bill Gates has become the focus for so many conspiracy theorists, people who believe he's somehow profiting from the pandemic. But first, let's take you back in time to when Bill and Melinda were just starting out and people had barely heard of the internet.
Hello, I'm Bill Gates, chairman of Microsoft.
You'll have electronic mail, you'll have video conferencing, so you can work out of your house.
Please welcome Bill Gates.
Bill Gates.
Bill Gates?
Bill Gates created Microsoft, the world's largest software company. Some say it is the most successful company in the most dazzling new industry of the century.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the very wealthy Bill Gates. Bill!
And what about this internet thing? Do you know anything about that?
Sure.
What he did in the private sector at Microsoft changed the face of culture and how we live today.
Let's plug it in. It's going to say, hey, I see you. Whoa.
And what Bill and Melinda Gates are doing with his foundation is changing the world.
Our belief is that all lives, no matter where they're lived on the globe, have equal value. All lives.
Oh, she's gorgeous.
Bill and Melinda Gates have now become the most generous philanthropists in the world.
Bill and I have a shared vision.
Some breaking news on Bill and Melinda Gates.
Bombshell announcement.
A shocking announcement that seemed to come out of nowhere. Bill and Melinda Gates, among the richest couples in the world, are splitting.
After a great deal of thought and a lot of work on our relationship, we have made the decision to end our marriage.
This is a joint statement, certainly taking many people by surprise.
Bill and Melinda Gates' 27-year marriage is irretrievably broken, according to Melinda's filing.
The Wall Street Journal reporting Melinda began talking to divorce attorneys roughly 2 years before the filing. The Journal citing several people, reporting that one source of concern for Melinda, a global advocate for women and girls, was Bill's dealings with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein.
I made a mistaken judgment that I thought that those discussions would lead literally to billions of dollars going to global health.
They will remain as co-chairs and trustees of their foundation. No changes are planned to their roles or their organization.
A foundation that's given billions of dollars to causes around the globe.
Fighting causes such as infectious diseases and encouraging vaccinations in children.
Their philanthropy has touched millions around the world, and now the question, what happens to their wealth?
Let's bring in our guest now. And David Glass is a divorce lawyer in Los Angeles who's represented plenty of high-profile clients over the years. On the other side of the country in New York, we have Vinu Varghese, a former state prosecutor who's been keeping an eye on all things Epstein for us. And we're also joined by Dr. Daniel Jolly, who's in Newcastle in England, who's been writing about the psychology of conspiracy theories. Well, welcome all of you to The Nexus. David, I'd like to start with you.
Sure.
As far as we understand it, it was Melinda who filed for divorce, but no reason was given by the couple other than the relationship had irretrievably broken down. Is that what we're to understand?
That's correct. She was the filing party, but Bill Gates signed on to it. It's called a joint petition in Washington state, where both parties together asked to be divorced and asked for the fast track to getting their divorce approved.
And they have already a separation agreement which they've worked out. And I'm just wondering, what does that cover? Who gets what? Is that specified?
That information has not been specified and likely will not be specified. Most high-profile couples will do a confidential agreement deciding who gets what and who gets what shares of what stock, and they keep that private, and then they only provide these sort of bland, vanilla documents to the court system.
And because they're filing in Washington state, there are laws governing divorce about who gets what, and it's very down the line, isn't it?
It is and it isn't.
Right.
Washington State follows community property law, which says all assets accumulated during the marriage get split 50-50. So that's straight down the line. The problem is, in this case, he owned and had created Microsoft prior to the marriage, but during the marriage, he used his community property efforts to build the company. So there are two aspects: what the company was worth when they got married and how much value he added to it during the marriage. Those are calculations that could take up to a year to figure out.
Wow. So when the pundits say that Melinda Gates is likely to become, the second richest woman in the world after Jeff Bezos' ex-wife, do you think that's about right, or would she exceed that amount?
It sounds about right. She's probably entitled to less than 50% of the entire estate. But because these two couples have been so public about giving away the majority of their estate, I'm assuming that they're going to come close to 50-50 in dividing the assets and giving them each half the assets to give away as they choose.
Okay, now we know that the Wall Street Journal is now reporting that Melinda was talking to divorce lawyers since 2019. Are you aware of those reports? Does that ring true for you?
It does make sense, because an estate that's this big, of $120 billion, it's going to take some significant time to tease that apart and decide who gets what. That would have been done by a team of lawyers and forensic accountants, and it very well could have taken the 2 to 3 years since then to figure out this deal.
Now, what's interesting, and what the link that's being made here, is that in October 2019, Bill Gates' relationship with Jeffrey Epstein was made public for the first time in an article in the New York Times, which reported that Bill first met Epstein in 2011 at his mansion in Manhattan. Let's just take a look at the picture. You can see them there with James E. Staley, who was a senior executive with J.P. Morgan, and the former U.S. Treasury Secretary Larry Summers. Now, bear in mind, by this time, 2011, Epstein was already a convicted sex offender. The New York Times reports that they met at least 3 times at Epstein's Manhattan residence, and at least once he stayed well into the night, according to their sources. Gates is also known to have flown on Epstein's private jet from Teterboro Airport in New Jersey to Palm Beach, Florida. Now, about a month after that newspaper article came out, Bill Gates explained in an interview why he had all those meetings with Epstein, and he said it was all in a good cause.
I made a mistaken judgment that I thought that those discussions would lead literally to billions of dollars going to global health. Turned out that was a bad judgment. That was a mirage. None of that money ever appeared. And I gave him some benefit by the association. So I made a doubly wrong mistake there.
Vinu, as a former New York State prosecutor, you've been watching the whole Epstein saga, which has played out in your city for years now. How was Epstein able to draw Bill Gates into his orbit?
I mean, the reports themselves in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal describing Epstein described him as this handsome, charming man who just attracted people to him. So, I mean, it could be that, his charisma, his donations, his fake Harvard affiliation, or it could be simply that, he brought these people over and brought them young girls. I mean, this is the subject of an ongoing investigation with the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Manhattan. And that involves also the continuing case against Ghislaine Maxwell. So, obviously the internet is ripe with conspiracy theories as to how Epstein died. And I've spoken about Epstein on your program. I've spoken about him on CBS This Morning and a number of news programs. The thing about the whole case is that this web is expanding, and from obviously the investigation, the case against Ghislaine Maxwell is not over; it's still proceeding.
Yeah.
And many people believe that she will flip and maybe open up the floodgates to a number of people that are going to be prosecuted in the future.
Now, Vinu, in the case of Bill Gates, obviously there's no accusation of any impropriety. It's just, as he's already admitted himself, it was bad judgment. He hoped that Jeffrey Epstein would raise billions and billions of dollars for good causes, and he had good reason to think that, didn't he? Because Jeffrey Epstein was the kind of man who had access to everybody. including Bill Clinton and Donald Trump and so on, at some point during, his sordid career. I'm just wondering if everybody in that sort of high society, wealthy society, by 2011, which was their first meeting, would have known that he was a convicted sex offender. He was convicted in 2008.
Look, a lot of this, the question is, or it appears that a number of them may not have known. Some of them appear did know and didn't really care. I mean, there was publicity regarding Epstein when the case occurred, but 2008 is not today. It's not even a few years ago with the intense scrutiny of social media and newspapers. So, I mean, basically, Epstein was able to function for a decade without much scrutiny as to his criminal conviction in Florida. So, I mean, it's possible. They may have known. It's possible they have known. I wouldn't put money on either way, on either side of that coin.
Some of the people quoted in the Wall Street Journal article who have spoken anonymously from the Gates Foundation said, we had no idea that he was, he had that record. I guess time will tell. But Gates did admit by associating with him, he inadvertently raised Epstein's profile. And that's true, isn't it? I mean, that was Epstein's MO the whole time, to use the rich and powerful as stepping stones to more rich and powerful people.
I mean, I don't know if it was Gates, certainly not Gates alone. I mean, everyone Epstein, was friendly with, raised his profile. I mean, from Bill Clinton to Donald Trump to, the Treasury Secretary to J.P. Morgan. I mean, that photo. I mean, it's astounding. And so I really think this is Bill Gates trying to do damage control and not affect his public reputation and coming out and saying, I apologize for something I didn't do, right? Because if Gates didn't know and he wasn't aware of this, then he shouldn't be apologizing. And, what's the error in judgment if he wasn't aware? I mean, you can't blame him for not being aware, because it's not, I don't think necessarily you're going to do a criminal background check on somebody who's going to give you money. I mean, maybe today you will, but I think at the time, 2008, it's probably unlikely, or 2011.
David, let's look at the timing of Melinda and how she started to, according to the newspapers, started to consult with lawyers in 2019. So is the timing about right? If the New York Times article came out exposing their relationship in October 2019, does that sound about right, that Melinda might have started consulting lawyers towards the end of 2019, having seen this article out in the public?
It does make sense. Oftentimes in marriages, there's a last straw, something that happens that pushes one of the parties over the edge and says, that's it, I've had enough, now it's time for me to get out. And given the public persona that both Bill and Melinda were trying to provide to the public of having this foundation, the largest charitable foundation in the United States, all the good they were doing, this very well could have been the last straw, and would lead her to consult with attorneys who could then start putting together the package.
Is that the kind of information that could give leverage to one party or the other in negotiations?
Probably not. Again, Washington State is a community property state. It's a no-fault state. It doesn't matter who's asking for the divorce, who did what to whom, whether anyone did anything wrong to each other or to them as a couple. If you want a divorce in a no-fault state, you ask for it, you wait for a waiting period, and you get it.
Now, you mentioned the foundation. Let's have a closer look at it. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation was founded in 2000. According to Forbes, Bill Gates has donated around $36 billion to the fund over the years. And a longtime friend of Bill and Melinda, the business tycoon investor Warren Buffett, has donated about $26 billion. The Gates Foundation has been focused on virus prevention and treatment long before the COVID-19 pandemic. In the 21 years since the inception of the foundation, it has worked to achieve gender equality, enabling widespread use of sustainable sanitation services, and access to adequate healthcare and education for the world's poorest communities. Well, Bill and Melinda have pledged to keep working together on the foundation. Nevertheless, despite those reassurances, some of the beneficiaries of the foundation are worried.
once what you call the divorce come through, definitely there will be casualties or victims in the process. And those victims would be the children of Africa, where the Gates family committed to do something in terms of their schools like ours.
Now, while Bill and Melinda are celebrated around the world for the good their foundation is doing, there are plenty of people who believe genuinely that Bill Gates is some sort of puppet master building a new world order. They even go so far as to say he's profiting from the coronavirus pandemic.
Listen to this. The Chinese-built biological laboratory in Wuhan is owned by GlaxoSmithKline, which owns Pfizer. GlaxoSmithKline is managed by the financial division of BlackRock, which managed the finance of Soros, the Open Foundation company, which manages the French AXA. Soros owns the German company Winterthur, which built the Chinese laboratory in Wuhan and was bought by the German Allianz, which has Vanguard as a shareholder. Who is shareholder of BlackRock, which controls central banks and manages about a third of global investment capital. BlackRock is also a major shareholder of Microsoft, owned by Bill Gates, who is a shareholder of Pfizer and is now the first sponsor of the WHO. So now you understand how a dead bat sold in a wet market in China has infected the whole planet.
Well, the Reuters news agency says that is total nonsense, that the Wuhan Institute of Virology is not, in fact, owned by GlaxoSmithKline. Dr. Daniel Jolly, you specialize in the psychology of conspiracy theories. Perhaps you could tell me, why has everybody moved on from George Soros and on to Bill Gates?
Well, Bill Gates has always been seen to be a villain. That's because conspiracy narratives point the finger at those who are powerful individuals or groups. That is why when we find ourselves in COVID-19, a very anxious time, that blaming it on, for example, Bill Gates, to suggest that vaccines are to make profit from him or to put a vaccine in us to track us, it explains that very complex event. In essence, it explains it in a very simple way, so we may feel less anxious. So that is why Bill Gates seems to be a villain, because it kind of helps us understand the world. But of course, it's based not in truth.
You say that, but have you ever tried to follow their logic, and where do you see it falling apart?
So, of course, it's all based around the world views, how we see the world. If we see the world as full of conspiracies, where people are involved in plots and schemes, you can see links between different events. Indeed, a person who has a tendency to see a pattern in noise, they're more likely to believe in conspiracies. So indeed, if you believe that Bill Gates is part of some elite and he's conspiring against the rest of us, you're likely to believe in many different events.
Right, but Dr. Jolly, they don't tend to pick on Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos. I mean, do they go after Gates for some particular reason? Does he actually have any pecuniary interests in what's going on with the pandemic?
So Bill Gates does seem to be that villain that people do go after. And indeed, it's not just been COVID-19. He's been seen to be part of conspiracies for some time. But in essence, it really is any powerful group. So the governments across the world are all seen to be involved in COVID-19, in essence, trying to cover it up. So Bill Gates just seems to be a good person to kind of point the finger at.
All right. Thank you all for your contributions to the Nexus today. Much appreciated. Well, let's turn now to one of Bill and Melinda Gates' primary goals, the eradication of malaria, which they call the forgotten epidemic. There were nearly 230 million cases of malaria in 2019, and more than 90% of them were in Africa. The parasite kills around 400,000 people every year, and most of those are under 5. So far, the Gates Foundation has committed some $3.5 billion towards a global fight against malaria. And now, after 50 years of research and failed trials, there has been significant progress. The first malaria vaccine to meet the WHO's target of 75% efficacy has reached phase 3 trials in Burkina Faso. And we can now speak to Professor Adrian Hill, the director of the Jenner Institute, which is developing the vaccine, and also Dr. Herman Sorgo, who is overseeing the trials in Burkina Faso, which is one of the worst affected countries. Welcome to both of you. Professor Hill, the vaccine has reached phase 3 trials. Why is this a significant milestone?
This is the final stage of testing any vaccine. And even though over 100 malaria vaccines have been tried in people in clinical trials, this is only the second to reach this stage of large-scale testing in almost 5,000 children in several countries in Africa. So this builds on results that came out of Burkina Faso and were published just recently, showing that the efficacy of this vaccine in Burkina Faso was high, 77%. And if we could replicate that in other countries and in a larger scale trial, that could be a very important public health tool for controlling malaria in Africa.
And scientists have been working on this for, what, half a century now? And
oh, way back, yes, about 100 years, but clinical trials started in the 1940s, became much more active in the 1980s. But because this is a disease caused by a parasite and not by a virus, which is a much simpler entity, it's been very much more difficult to make vaccines against parasites. And in fact, we don't have any on the market. So this would be a technical breakthrough as well if the trial succeeds.
Now, you've drawn the distinction between parasites and viruses, but you look at the pace of discovery for coronavirus, and it's not just that distinction, is it? It's all the regulatory hurdles and the money. Can you explain how, if the same approach was taken, how much more helpful it would be for your research?
Well, interestingly, last year in Africa, more people died, about 4 times as many, we estimate, from malaria as from COVID, even though COVID has been a global problem for the last year or so. But yes, we've learned from COVID that it is feasible to develop new vaccines much more quickly than even the greatest experts predicted back at the start of 2020. So maybe there's a lesson there for other vaccines, even though they're difficult, like malaria vaccines are, that we could be able to develop these more quickly and move them forward and save some of those 300,000 or so deaths that happen in children in Africa every year from malaria.
Dr. Herman Sorgo, you're overseeing the trials on the ground there in Burkina Faso. Just tell me, how do you actually go about organizing them, recruiting people to participate and so on?
For this phase 3 trial also, we started 2 months ago by running a census to identify all the eligible children, and our active social research team members contacted those parents to engage them, present the study, so that we are able, since 2 days from now, to start the enrollment of the children. It has been quite a long process, but as an organized research team, it's now rolling up slowly but surely.
Was it difficult to persuade people that your trials would be safe?
Of course, for any new adventure, there is always the question of safety, which is really key in our actual activity. But as I just said, we have a very transparent history of collaboration with the community, so that before we invite them to embark into our study, we have this discussion going from the community leaders to community stakeholders, committees, and before we invite a single parent to the clinic, they are already aware of what is about this study. And as just Professor Hill just said, this adventure has started like 2 years ago. So the community is somehow exposed to the nature of this vaccine and is about, so that the reluctance to participate, it's not really an issue for the time being.
This is such an important issue for people in Burkina Faso. What do you tell them when they ask you, how long will we have to wait for a vaccine?
Of course. Myself is someone living here who grew up here, who knows what is malaria and how painful it is for me as an individual and for my community. But for having a good solution, it requires the necessary time. so that we say we are set to run a trial and test this candidate vaccine, and it will take again 2 years to evaluate the efficacy of the study. And after that, if it's concluent as the result of the phase 3 that we just completed, we will be able in 3 to 4 years' time to provide to the world a new malaria vaccine. And that's the time that will take.
Well, it's a moment to look forward to. Dr. Herman Sorgo and Professor Adrian Hill, thank you both for your contributions to the Nexus. Much appreciated. And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. Remember, you can see this episode or any of our previous episodes on our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus TRT World. Till next week then, goodbye.